Again, we're at our 6:11 Bible time. We're in the Word. We're waking up in the Word, and we use 6:11 again from the Lord's model prayer that says, "Give us this day our daily bread." So I hope you're having a great time in this really lockdown, and I say that in a way tongue in cheek, but this is a huge opportunity for us to kind of get back to some really good, solid practices that maybe have slipped away over the years. And my hope is, and my prayer these days is that when the doors are open, as it were, and the church can start functioning again without limitation, we will come out and emerge stronger, bolder, and of greater faith. And so good to see you all this morning. I've been encouraged by your comments and encouraged by your presence in the morning. I hope it's a blessing to you. I do want to encourage you to always share with me your thoughts, opinions, questions, insights. You can do that through Messenger. You can do it even right here on live. I'm never afraid of questions. And as the other day when Ronnie pointed out a mistake I had made, I have no problem addressing if I missed something, however I did it. So we want the truth, don't we? That's what we're after here. And you're having insight and eyes and the guidance of the Holy Spirit will just make it that much sweeter and that much nicer, okay? As you know, we're in the study of Noah, and we are going to kick off into him personally today and look at some things from there. Before we do, I came across this quote. I was preparing for this coming Sunday, and it's from A.W. Tozer. A scared world needs a fearless church. A scared world needs a fearless church. As you've heard me say over and over again, when we talk about the deceptions and the lies of Satan, the lies are always going to lead us to a place of bondage, and usually that bondage is a place of fear. And we serve a great God, don't we? We serve a God who can do the impossible. He can, in this story that we're looking at with Noah, he's already projected in his mind that his spirit is not going to always strive with the spirit of man, and there's going to be 120 years that he's now given to the destruction that he's purposed in his mind that's going to come. But he's able to preserve, and so we see the life of Noah. And as we look at it through character studies, I think one of the best things we can do in our personal walk, because they're just people like you and I. Nothing extraordinary about them. In fact, they're very weak people, and God's strength is what comes through, and he gets the glory as a result. When we look at Noah, or we look at any character, there's some things that we can kind of come away with. First, it gives us some real insightful instruction when we see how God interacts with these characters. Secondly, it sometimes instills in us hope, especially when they're characters like Noah and others, even those that have made grievous error or sin, and God's mercy comes forth. It still gives us hope. It teaches us about human nature and what we are prone to do in our sinful condition. It pricks our imagination, our mind, so that we can even embed ourselves into the story and begin to imagine how was it to be for instance, in the day of Noah, when he was a righteous man and virtually everyone around him wasn't. And what about encourage us in faith? Then when we see people who are in difficult situations emerge out of that, having done right. And it gives us some insight into God and especially into his grace. So I'm going to go with a verse out of Genesis chapter number 6, verse 13, to start our study today. Notice here in verse 13, "And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Here's where we get into some character study. Imagine we are Noah. God, you've been walking with God, because we're going to look at it in just a minute. He's a just man, he's perfect, and he's walking with God. And in this walk with God, one day, God turns to him and says, the end of all flesh is come. What would you and I then respond with? What would you and I do? How would we react if we saw the end of the world? God just said the end of the world is coming. And then he says to you, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to build an ark. Now, we've already talked about the whole idea of, well, what's a boat? What's a flood? Even the aspect of what is a torrential rain. These are things that are foreign to Noah. He doesn't understand those things, but yet he has to take the mind of the Lord, the instruction of the Lord, the pattern and plan of the Lord, and he now needs to implement it. So here's some questions I pose to us. What if I or you heard these words from God today? The end of all flesh is come. What would we do? What would we do first? How would we act in front of others? The most striking thing is speaking to me today, what would I do first? What would I do first? God has just given me the instruction that all the flesh is going to come to an end. What would I do first? Secondly, let's look at some other questions. What if we knew this event was yet in the future, like Noah? Now, we're not sure if Noah's been told it'll be 120 years. He just knows that it's coming in the future. What does human nature usually do when I think it's coming tomorrow? I put it off. I put it off. That's human nature. We're going to come back to that in just a second, but let's talk about some other things that come out of that thought. What would we prioritize if we knew it was coming in the future? How would we prioritize? And then what would we do? What would we do? So we've already noted real quick that Noah is a just man. We kind of talked about this briefly the other day. I wrote these things down. He found grace in the favor, a grace in God's eyes, which is favor and kindness. We're going to say that there was a direct connection between this grace and this man of faith who did justly, which means he just did right. He was consistently doing what's right. We note this word perfect. He's called perfect. Now, that can be a discouraging word to us today, but that doesn't mean that it's unattainable. It basically means that he was a man that was without blemish. He was entire. He was a completer. He was mature at the level that he was at, and what God gave him to do, he completed it, even if it meant a personal improvement in the things of God. And then we note that he walked with God. Now, I've written on the side here, note the order. Just, perfect, walked. This is an intimacy with God. This is abiding with God. And I'm going to suggest to you that God is a God of order. He does everything in order. Everything is decently and in order, we read in 1 Corinthians 14. Even the way creation comes forth in Genesis chapter 1, number 1. Everything is done in order. Even the way that salvation is brought to man is done in order. We start with the sin in the garden. We see that there is a sacrifice of an innocent to clothe Adam and Eve. We jump forward into these covenants with Noah, with Abraham, David, etc., all the way to Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. We see order, order, order. There is nothing out of order with God's life. Now, why would he then put the order of Noah? He's just, He's perfect, and he walks with God. I would like to suggest to you that none of us start off walking with God. All right, we know that the only way we could walk with God is with a relationship, and that relationship must be based upon what Jesus Christ did for you and I at the cross at Calvary. We believe that his sacrifice atoned at one meant, that's the word atone, think about it, at one meant, atonement with God. He made us one again with God. Now, with that, we have a relationship. We have a relationship. So, he then gives me bits and pieces to follow. Obedience, doing what's right. Not right in my own eyes, doing what's right in God's eyes. Okay? Then, as we do that, we start to mature. We start to have understanding. We come to completeness. Oh, perfect. That's the word behind the word perfect. Now we're learning how to walk with God. There's the order. Doing what's right, being obedient, coming to maturity as we are obedient, now learning how to walk with God. That's where Noah is at this point, okay? So with that, let's move on. Let's move on with a couple other thoughts here. So, real quick, there's a contrast between Noah, who did what was right, and remember, he's doing what's right in God's eyes, not what's right in man's eyes, not what's right in my eyes, not what's right in the culture or the community's eyes. And he has to have been right inwardly. Inwardly, okay? For us to do anything outwardly correct, we have to have started it inward. So in contrast, remember, this is where we began weeks ago. The culture's thoughts of the heart are on evil continually. In contrast, we have Noah. His thoughts of his heart are on righteousness continually, which means the whole day long. The world that he lived in, their imagination, that is the construct or the framing or the scheming of those thoughts and heart, were on evil the whole day long. But Noah's scheming, the imaginations of his heart, his every waking hour was on trying to do what's right. I was meditating on this yesterday. How many of us like scammers? Nobody. But think about a scammer. A scammer wakes up in the beginning of the day and begins to say, how can I steal from someone today? And they begin through phone calls, letters, emails, however they do it. All day long until they sleep again that night, they're in the business of scamming. This is what Noah lived in. Everyone he met was trying to steal, take from him. And he had to consistently still do what is right. I got a long ways to go. So with that, hence he's a man of faith, and he does what's right by faith. And because of that, God brings grace into his life and gives him the ability to do it so that he's not tempted past that which he's able to bear. God's grace is sufficient for the day and the hour and the moment, and he begins to live like that. Now, let's go on to where this goes, and we'll conclude for today. So we see here, because Noah had a practice of doing things right, meaning decently according to God's standard and orderly according to God's standard, and because he was a finisher, which means he had to be an overcomer, which means he was a completer, he matured and he grew into perfection, and because he walked with God. What do you think the first thing Noah did when he heard that the earth and the world was coming, or the flesh was coming to an end? We know from verse 22, notice here. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. I believe God's looking for people like Noah in this day and age, We know we're coming to the end. I don't know when. My lifetime? I kind of suspect so. But even if it's not, we know that there's a time frame here. We are coming to the end. What are we going to do first for God? Noah did this. He paid particular attention to the instruction of God regarding the ark, even if he had to take out a pad of paper and write it down. He listened intently, and then he did it. No delay. He did it. Now, to get to that place of taking on a hard task is not something God gives to us overnight. It starts back to those three characteristics of Noah. Number one, do right. To delay is to disobey. Just do right. You know, I know what God expects of me. Let's do it. Secondly, let's move on to perfection. In other words, let's mature. It's time to grow up. We have way too much immaturity, especially in church ranks today. There's no room for this. There's too much immaturity in the church today. It's time to grow up, which means be a completer, be an overcomer, do it for God, and stop expecting things to be done for you and I. And then thirdly, let's learn how to walk with God. Go with God. Let God go with you, and it will be a blessing.